whatever their differences. On this issue, these politicians are united as never before.
If we came out of the community, the effect on investment here would be damaging.
We'll get the benefit. The areas of high unemployment, the development areas, the whole of Scotland will benefit.
We know there'll be fewer jobs if we come out.
The unequal contest ended with an unequal result. Hopelessly ill-prepared, outspent, outmaneuvered and divided, the No campaign flopped and the country voted heavily for yes. In fact, for all the good it did them, the No campaign might as well have stayed at home. In the hot summer of 1975, the campaign was soon forgotten.
In the summertime, when the weather is high, you can stretch right up and touch the sky. When the weather's fine, you got women on your mind. Have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find.
Other issues now dominated British politics. Economic decline seemed unstoppable. Strikes, uncontrollable. The left continued its slow-motion takeover of the Labour Party. Jim Callaghan succeeded Harold Wilson at the head of a demoralised minority government. Europe seemed a closed issue.
Tell you what I don't want to see.
What's that?
Labour in power again.
Labour in power? Was that the Marx Brothers?
No, another bunch of comedians.
Coming shortly, the Conservatives.
By 1979, with Britain knee-deep in rubbish, and so strike-bound that even bodies were not being buried, the pro-market Margaret Thatcher took office.
I can't bear Britain in decline. I just can't. We who either defeated or rescued half Europe, who kept half Europe free, when otherwise it would be in chains. And look at us now.
For the Thatcher government in May 1979, Europe was still a minor side issue. She wanted to break the power of the unions and liberalise the economy. Blithely unaware of what lay in store, the Conservatives were overwhelmingly pro-European. The Sceptics were an irrelevance.
Mrs. Thatcher was enthusiastic about the question of Europe. I'd already become a little bit sceptical myself because I'd had contact with people who were working in the European environment, and they had this sort of tiresome tendency to be idealistic and grandiose and theoretical, and all of this I found very otherworldly and impractical.
But while the Tories drifted complacently, the issue was still very much alive in the Labour Party. The party's hard and sceptical left used the 1979 defeat to seize power. They turned against what they saw as a capitalist plot. The lovable but ineffectual Michael Foot became leader. Tony Benn appointed himself the workers' champion. By 1983, Labour were wholly committed to withdrawal from the European community. The manifesto stated clearly, British withdrawal from the community is the right policy for Britain, to be completed well within the lifetime of the Parliament. Thanks to Foot's far-out policies and Mrs. Thatcher's Falklands triumph, Labour were annihilated in the 1983 election. Neil Kinnock inherited the seemingly hopeless task of leadership. By 1984, the combative Margaret Thatcher faced her first real fight in Europe. At Fontainebleau, Mrs. Thatcher fought a rebate battle against the French and the Germans. Britain's huge net contributions to the community were plainly unfair. But this was not a fundamental clash of principle. Her aim was to make Britain's membership more bearable, not to undermine it. She succeeded in cutting our contribution by a third.
We've got 66% of a certain gap between what we put in and what we get out. It's not quite the whole amount, but it's 66%, and it will last much longer than any previous agreement.
Her most pro-European period came after the successful conclusion of the debate on our budget rebate, when she launched the initiative on this building the European single market. And if you read her memoirs, you'll find that even in 1985 she was describing herself as a European idealist, perhaps with a different ideal of exactly how Europe should develop from many others, but still as a European idealist.
Mrs. Thatcher wanted to complete the so-called single market. Supposedly, this meant British goods could be sold easily in European community countries on equal terms. Ministers thought it would boost our newly deregulated economy. But in return, we had to hand over important decision-making powers to Brussels and lose many of our national vetoes. In Brussels, running the Commission was Jacques Delors, the man Mrs. Thatcher thought could help with the creation of the single market. She didn't grasp that Delors was a keen federalist who had advanced plans for the United States of Europe, together with monetary and economic union, or that the Single European Act she signed would bring the European superstate far closer.
There was a tendency, particularly in the Foreign Office, but I think among the British politicians too, to underestimate the strength of the drive to ever greater integration, and to underestimate too the importance of each small step leading to something else.
At the Luxembourg summit in 1995, Mrs. Thatcher agreed to the act, handing substantial power to Brussels.
There are some people who are going to say, oh, this majority voting means that we could be voted down on important subjects.
Yes, but on the other hand, we do need to get some of our trade and business into the common market, which is stopped now because they won't agree to certain standards because one person can veto it.
I was Margaret Thatcher's chief policy advisor in the middle 1980s. The only thing I was not responsible for was Foreign Office policy, and the single market was on the edges. It was at the territorial dispute end of the spectrum. Foreign Office advised us very strongly to back it. I was very worried about it.
Margaret Thatcher went into the Single European Act wholeheartedly and enthusiastically. She thought that was to the benefit of Britain because we would be able to export more. She thought it was to the benefit of Europe because it would open it up and liberalise the economy.
Look at the title of that treaty, Single European Act. Nothing much about a market there. It's about a single Europe. It's not about a single market. It was about giving a whole new vast tranche of powers. I mean, it's in that treaty that we get for the first time mentions of the single currency, economic and monetary union, and of a common foreign policy and a common defence policy. Everything that's been rolling on ever since actually began at that time.
Now, in 12 areas of decision-making, we could be outvoted and overruled by the rest of Europe. As a deregulated city boomed, small business was swamped by a mudslide of new Brussels rules.
It was an enormous new burden for people running almost any kind of industry, scrap metal, fishermen, care homes, whatever. People who were affected directly and found that their business was becoming much harder to run, or in some cases impossible. I mean, we lost tens of thousands of businesses because they couldn't comply with all these mad regulations that were pouring out.
The Single European Act was a major step towards political and economic union, missold as an opening up of markets. The sceptics had failed to pay enough attention to it, and so it slipped easily and quickly through Parliament. Mrs. Thatcher went on to win a third election in 1987. She and her government were tired and stale, but weak opposition kept her in office. Her cabinet were restive and many colleagues yearned to displace her. And she was starting to have serious doubts about Europe, doubts she confided to close allies.